Welcome to the Containment Zone, where danger doesn't always come with claws, teeth, or mass. Sometimes it arrives in the sound of a bell. Software brief, barely there, but once you've heard it, you're never alone again. SCP-513, commonly referred to as the bell, not because it summons something, but because it sends it after you. One ring. That's all it takes. And what follows doesn't stop. The object itself is unassuming. A simple, rusted cowbell, roughly 10 centimeters tall, discovered in an abandoned farmhouse in rural Louisiana. No markings, no symbols, just a loop of decayed twine and a resonance that should be impossible. Because the bell doesn't need to be loud, it only needs to be heard. The recovery team made no special preparations. They didn't think they had to. 2 personnel entered the barn where the bell was discovered. Neither reported hearing anything unusual. They tagged the object, bagged it, and sealed it in a soundproof container. 2 days later, one of them was dead. No signs of trauma, no struggle, just eyes wide open, jaw shattered from what looked like an attempt to scream through clenched teeth. The other survived, but he never slept again, because when he closed his eyes, he heard it clang, and he wasn't alone anymore. SCP-513 was first classified as a low-risk artifact. Its containment was casual, no electromagnetic readings, no chemical anomalies, no immediate effect. Until the first exposure report. Agent Mallory, part of the initial retrieval team, began showing signs of sleep deprivation within 48 hours. He couldn't describe why, said it was just a feeling, that he wasn't alone in his room, that he heard footsteps when no one was walking. When asked for details, he said, "It's not outside, it's behind my eyes." At first, the report seemed like paranoia, hallucinations, post-mission stress, until the second team member, Technician Ruiz, filed an incident report stating he'd begun seeing a shape at the edge of mirrors, something tall, bent, just slightly wrong. He described it as a man made of static, like it's not there until you look at it. Security logs confirmed that neither man had opened the containment case. The bell had not been rung, not officially, but recordings from the farmhouse revealed something else. While cataloging the interior, one of them brushed the shelf, and in the background, so faint it was nearly lost beneath ambient wind, was a sound. One note, metallic, hollow. The bell had rung, by accident. But that was enough. Mallory's condition deteriorated rapidly. Within a week, he was unable to maintain verbal coherence. His last coherent statement was captured during a mandatory psychological eval. "I see him every time I blink." He died in containment, alone, in a secured observation room. The cause: stress-induced cardiac failure. The autopsy revealed nothing unusual. No chemical imbalance, no brain damage. But his eyes, they were dry. So dry that the corneas had cracked, as if he hadn't blinked in days. Ruiz survived longer. He adapted, tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself that it wasn't real, until one night he turned on every light in his quarters, covered every reflective surface, sat perfectly still, and was found the next morning, rocking back and forth, repeating, "He's standing in the light now." The Foundation upgraded SCP-513 to Euclid. Containment was sealed. Access restricted. No further testing permitted without Level 4 authorization, because whatever the bell summons, it doesn't arrive right away, it waits. And then it follows. SCP-513's effect is not the bell, it's what comes after. Every subject who hears SCP-513, even once, even faintly, will begin to see something, not immediately, not consistently, but inevitably. The entity has no official name. Internally, it's referred to as SCP-513-1. Those who've seen it describe it the same way: a tall figure, skeletal proportions, gray, translucent skin, sunken chest, elongated arms ending in knuckled, motionless fingers, head bald, jaw distended, no pupils, no irises, just empty sockets filled with something too deep to be light. It does not speak. It does not move quickly, but it always moves closer. At first, it's seen in reflections, in the gaps between door frames, in the background of recorded footage. It doesn't appear when you expect it, only when your guard is down. Subjects report a slow, tightening spiral of perception. First, they feel watched. Then they see it. Then it doesn't go away. It becomes present in dreams, in shadows, in places no one else can see. And yet, no one else ever does. Because SCP-513-1 appears only to the afflicted. It's personal. It's yours. One subject described seeing the entity seated in the corner of his living quarters, cross-legged, unmoving, watching him breathe. Every time he looked away, the figure inched closer, but it never crossed the room in view. Another report detailed the sound of fingernails scraping the underside of a subject's bed. Slow, deliberate, measured. But when the lights were turned on, nothing. Only small flakes of skin on the floor, and a smell that shouldn't have been there: ozone and copper. 513-1 does not cause physical harm. It doesn't need to. Sleep deprivation, psychosis, auditory hallucinations, sensory collapse. These follow naturally, because once you hear the bell, you know what's coming. And every second it isn't there is a second spent wondering when it will be again. SCP-513 is currently housed in a soundproof storage locker at Armed Containment Site 23. The container itself is triple sealed, a rubber-lined steel case, an anechoic isolation shell, and an external acoustic dampening barrier. Monitored 24/7 by vibration sensors. No one enters the chamber without written clearance from 2 Level 4 supervisors. Even then, protective auditory dampeners must be worn at all times, because the bell cannot be unheard, and the sound, once released, cannot be retrieved. All testing was suspended after Incident 513 Epsilon. During a controlled exposure sequence, a D-class subject was instructed to ring the bell, 1 tone, duration, under 1 second. The result? 23 seconds of silence. Then screaming. The subject collapsed, convulsed, and began clawing at their own face. When restrained, they described seeing a figure already inside the test chamber. It had appeared the moment the bell stopped ringing. Security staff entered with no visual contact. Nothing was recorded on thermal, infrared, or visual spectrum. But the subject's vitals began to crash whenever someone stepped between him and the far left corner of the room. Something was there, to him, but not to us. The subject was later transferred to long-term psychological containment, no external injuries. But he refused to speak again. His final statement was written in pencil on the wall of his sleeping quarters. "He stands where I can't see, so I'll never stop looking." After that, SCP-513 was reclassified. No further auditory testing permitted. No accidental activation tolerated. Even being near the bell in silence is enough to induce anticipatory anxiety in low-resilient staff, not because it does anything while idle, but because it could. the Foundation began logging all possible auditory leaks. Every room near 513's locker was triple sealed. Sound traps were installed in floor vents. A motion detector was placed inside the case itself to confirm if ever the bell moves on its own. To date, it hasn't. But 3 separate logs show ambient frequency spikes in the middle of the night when the bell didn't ring. And yet, something changed. The staff member sleeping nearest to the containment vault requested transfer the next morning. When asked why, they replied, "Because I know what the sound would feel like, and I think I've already felt it." The bell rings only once. That's all it needs. But the sound never ends. Those affected by SCP-513 often survive the first few days. They adapt, they rationalize. They call it stress, fatigue, a passing thought. But then the figure appears, not in full, not in focus, just there. And something inside them starts to break. Interview logs reveal a recurring pattern. First confusion, then paranoia, then obsession. One subject, known as Case 513-7, was placed in a standard observation suite after controlled exposure. Within 72 hours, he had blacked out every window, ripped the light fixtures from the ceiling, and carved a single phrase into his bed frame: "Don't blink." When interviewed, he spoke calmly. For exactly 90 seconds, he described the entity as polite, never touching, never rushing. Then his voice dropped. He leaned forward and whispered, "It's not watching me. It's waiting for me to stop watching it." When asked what would happen if he did, he closed his eyes and screamed. Another case involved a research assistant accidentally exposed during a calibration check. She never spoke again. Her logs, however, show something stranger. She began writing notes in her own personnel file day after day. Statements that weren't addressed to anyone. "He was in the hallway today. He didn't knock." The reflection in the faucet smiled before I did. "It's closer, not physically, just closer." When she disappeared from her quarters, the room was empty, except for her shoes, arranged neatly at the foot of the bed, and behind the mirror, fog. But the temperature in the room hadn't changed. Long-term survivors of 513 exposure have developed coping mechanisms. Constant lighting, white noise, eyelid guards, paired surveillance, never being alone. But none of these stop it. They only delay its presence, because SCP-513-1 never attacks. It doesn't need to. It waits for the subject to fall apart on their own. And the closer you come to collapse, the more clearly you see it. Not as a ghost, not as a creature, but as something you were always supposed to notice. And once you do, you can't unsee it, you can't forget. The sound. SCP-513 has no moving parts, no internal power, no intelligence, voice, or will of its own. And yet, every time it rings, something happens that shouldn't be possible. The entity that follows, SCP-513-1, cannot be recorded. It cannot be tracked. It has never left a trace of mass, sound, or impact. But it knows you. It watches. It waits. Which leads to one conclusion. SCP-513 is not a trap. It's an invitation, a signal, a threshold, a quiet metallic summoning. But summoning what? Some Foundation theorists suggest that SCP-513-1 is not a creature, but a filter. A perceptual anomaly that aligns your senses with something you were never meant to perceive. Others believe it's a symptom, that the bell is a trigger which fractures cognitive defense, allowing a dormant psychic infection to become active. But one proposal, redacted, sealed, and buried under 7 levels of access, makes a darker claim. That SCP-513 is not an object from another world. It's from ours. And 513-1 is not an invader, not an outsider, not a haunting. It is what remains. When a part of you is cut away, the piece that held doubt, fear, hesitation, and once that piece is gone, what's left is a figure that follows a ... to remind you of what you can no longer ignore. This aligns with reports of 513-1 appearing most often during moments of emotional vulnerability. Guilt, shame, isolation, regret. The entity doesn't react to stimuli. It doesn't communicate, but it responds. To grief. Because SCP-513 doesn't give you something new. It reveals something you've been carrying all along. And after the bell rings, you finally see it. You see him, waiting, still, silent, and you know he always was. SCP-513 remains in secure containment, sealed, silenced, unmoving. But the real danger has never been the bell, it's what happens after you hear it. No one knows what SCP-513-1 truly is. No image has been captured, no voice recorded, no physical trace recovered, but everyone who sees it describes the same certainty that it isn't coming toward you. It's already there, watching, patient, waiting for the moment you can no longer keep your eyes open. The Foundation has issued full moratoriums on testing. No further exposures authorized. All surviving victims of previous incidents remain under indefinite psychological care. But despite this, despite every protocol, every containment barrier, every note of caution, there is still one fact we cannot control. SCP-513 could ring. By accident. A shelf. A shift. A tremor in the case. A careless movement too close to steal, and then it's too late. Because the bell doesn't scream. It doesn't demand. It just rings. Once. And from that point on, your life is measured by the spaces between footsteps and the sound you think you heard just behind you. Thank you for reviewing another anomaly in the Containment Zone. And if you ever hear a bell, soft and hollow, without a visible source, don't turn around. You won't like what's already there.